Hello, my friends. Welcome to Momentum Boost. I'm Adrienne Gold Davis, your vintage 80s host of Momentum Boost and one of the trip leaders for Momentum. You know, at Momentum, we strive to inspire you to live your most meaningful life by connecting to Jewish values, engaging with Israel, taking action, and by fostering unity without uniformity. And today, we're going to explore Jewish values through family dynamics. So let's get started. It's time for today's boost. And remember, as always, if you have any questions, make sure you enter them in the Q&A box that Zoom provides. We monitor it throughout the webinar and we try and get to all of your questions. But for today, I am personally so delighted to welcome Avrum Nadigel. Avrum Nadigel, MSW BCom, is the author of 3 books which happen to have pride of place beside my bed. And he runs a private practice with a focus on marriage and adolescent mental health. He's also a musician and just an all-around brilliant guy. He lives in Toronto, Ontario, with his wife, Elisa, who's a child psychiatrist, and his 3 cute sons. So I would like to help me welcome Avrum. Hi.
Hi, Adrienne.
So nice to see you.
It's great to see you.
I know I speak for the entire Momentum audience that we are dying for this half an hour of free therapy because heaven knows in these times of COVID, we need some wisdom. So just tell me, what are we going to get from you and how much results are we going to see?
Well, before we dive into the minutia of John Hughes' classic film, The Breakfast Club, I just want to provide a suggestion for the parents who are listening here. In my practice, the families that I'm speaking with are really overwhelmed by a clustering of stressors right now, worldwide pandemic and a lot of political stuff. And I think that there's only so much one can do in a novel event like this. So whatever we talk about, whatever strategies we discuss, be humble. If you keep your kids alive from one day to the next, you're doing a great job. And then now we can proceed.
Okay, so what you're saying is to keep our expectations low, but you know, it's important to learn even if we can't practice at the moment. And so just tell me, why on earth would you have chosen this epic film as the metaphor for what you want to talk about?
You know, Adrienne, I've always wanted to, but I've been working on books and writing books, and I just thought it was too light. You know, I've wanted to write books for a certain type of audience, specifically around marriage. But I found everything was so heavy the past few weeks. And my 3rd book I was working on, I shelved for the time being. Everything was heavy. I didn't feel I had anything to contribute. And then I thought, you know, this passion project of mine is a great opportunity now, something practical. So specifically the blog series I'm doing on the Breakfast Club, something practical but light and fun, and something that's relevant for parents who probably have teenagers right now. You know, it's interesting, Adrienne, I was listening to Molly Ringwald in an interview, and she was saying how she's showing her kids who are 11 and 12, the Breakfast Club now and Pretty in Pink and discussing with them. So I'm assuming that parents who have teenagers probably saw these films in the theater and could relate to some of the messages there.
Oh yeah, no, there's no question. You know, it's interesting to me, Avrum, is like, first of all, I know that even though you've chosen this film as a way to frame it, I know that your message and what you're about to teach us is anything but light. And I know that, excuse me, as I watch that movie again, as a remembrance of coming on to speak to you today, I realized that I used to think I was Bender, but now I think I might be Molly. I'm not so sure. So let's get started, because this is a beautiful way to teach through something that doesn't feel as onerous. So let's go for it. Okay.
Do you have a specific question?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I wanted to, sorry, I was just like opening it up for you to just spill your wisdom out. Just tell me, why are people showing up at your office lately? Are you finding that since COVID, there's more people, there's more stressors? Tell me what you hear the most.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the main things that families are struggling with, especially if they have teenagers, is the anxiety of the future.
Right.
How do I support my kid while they're struggling right now in terms of, are they going to go to university? Is it going to be online? Should I be paying that amount of money to send my kid to university if it is online? What if my kid wants to defer a year because university for my child was about Frosh Week and friends? And so the parents are really getting anxious about this. And what I'm noticing is they are missing the point of their role as a wise elder to their teenager. And what do I mean by that?
Right.
And this is where the Breakfast Club will come into this. You know, I think what happens with parents, now my kids are young, so I'm not there yet, but I've been working with teenagers now for about 3 decades, teenagers and families. And one of the things that's really challenging for parents is moving from a top-down type of parenting, where you tell a 4-year-old clean your room, and they do
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah.
to more of a consultant. And what a lot of parents have trouble is adjusting to that new role as being more of a peer consultant to your adolescent as they are making their own decisions. But what a lot of parents come into my office is they're still trying to adopt that top-down heavy approach
Right.
with respect to their kids. I know what's best for you. This is what you should do. This is the most practical path. And what happens is, and if you, The Breakfast Club is an amazing, amazing film for this. If you look at all 5 characters in The Breakfast Club, every single one of those characters don't feel seen, heard, or understood by their parents.
Now, is that
Not,
specifically about that film, or do you think that that's fairly common in most families?
well, it's an excellent question. So I think it's a continuum in life. In the film, I think John Hughes specifically demonstrated 5 archetypes of how this plays itself out.
Okay,
And we
let's
can
go
get
through.
into two, sorry?
You want to go through them for me?
Sure, sure. So I just want to give you, so just from a top level, I really do think my late supervisor, my 3rd book was written with my co-author with my late supervisor. He had this idea that the role of a parent of a teenager is to see, hear, and understand them. And to do that, you have to be less anxious and not project onto your child the child you need versus the child you have.
Whoa, say that again. Repeat that right
No,
now.
it's a very deep idea, and it's really tricky. I think that a lot of people come to my office and they say things like, "But I love my child." This has nothing. Tina Turner said, "What does love have to do with it?" It has nothing to do with love. All parents that I know love their kids, but if you need your child to be a certain way to calm yourself down, you're going to project onto them something to regulate your own anxiety. And your teenager is naturally going to do a few things. And that's the brilliance of the Breakfast Club. All those 5 types of kids represent what teens do when they are anxiously focused on. So I can give you an example if you want to dive into, okay, so
Right.
I'm going to share my screen right now.
Okay.
Okay, let's do this here.
I find this thrilling.
Okay, here we go. Tell me if you see my screen.
I see that you're getting there to share it. You're going to have to, yeah.
Okay, is it there? Okay, so I want to give you an example. I think when we think of how parents anxiously project onto their kids their hopes and their dreams and their fantasies, and the kids rebel or they move back. And this is a common complaint to my office. My kids don't speak to me. My kids don't talk to me. They talk to their friends. They talk to anybody else but me. This is an example. So this is the jock Andrew, where he tortures a kid, right? This is from the script. He tortures a kid because he wanted his father to think that he was cool. Okay, you remember that scene, right? This is where he's very upset by this, that he tortured this kid. And then he says, sometimes I wish my knee would give away, and my father would forget about me. Now, if you noticed in this little thing here called the family diagram, or the fancy term is a genogram, the arrow is going both ways. So what's happening is father, at the beginning of the scene, if you remember, they're in the car, and he says, "Sport, you got caught, sport," but blah, 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 and his father is digging him and pushing him and pushing him. And so that's the father's anxious focus on Andrew. I work with a lot of kids like that, where it's not about love. The parents love their kids, but the parents have a certain dream for their child, or they have a wish for their child, but the child doesn't share that wish. The child doesn't share that dream. Okay, now a lot of kids will go along with it. Why? A lot of people think teenagers are rebellious by nature. It's not true. Take Andrew. Andrew went along with his father's dream. And what's happened is now he's in grade 11 or 12, and he's fantasizing about having a life-ending injury. I mean, that's powerful stuff, that he just wishes that he would have such a broken, I don't know, hip or bone or something, that he won't ever be able to play football again. And
Because,
so, and
wait. Because
yeah.
football is too important to his father? Is this the dynamic you're telling me? That Andrew perceives that to please his father, he has to play football. He can't not please his father, so he'd rather die?
That's wonderful. No, and that's what's so powerful about this. For many years, we don't know this, but we can assume for many years, Andrew was playing football and he was unconscious. He wasn't aware of him fulfilling his father's wish. It was only when he tortured the kid. That's what's key. It's when he tortured this kid that Andrew realized, what is becoming of me? Everything I'm doing is in deference to my father. Everything I'm doing is based on what I think my father wants. And Andrew is losing himself in the process. I'd like to show you another example, which I
Okay.
don't think we think about in terms of anxious focus. So we're going to go over here. We're going to pick up another, we're going to pick up Allison, the infamous dandruff scene in the Breakfast Club. Now, Allison has a very different type of relationship with her parents. This is the scene where she's crying and she says, my parents ignore me, and that's my problem. So, and it breaks your heart when you think about that, right? Because we think, you know, what parent ignores their kid? Well, first of all, parents don't ignore their kid because they don't love them. We don't know what's going on in this parent's marriage. We don't know what's going on if there's a financial stress, if one of the parents, God forbid, have cancer and they're in the hospital all the time. We don't know what's going on. Excuse me. But she feels that she's being ignored. Now, she also doesn't feel seen, heard, and understood, just like Andrew doesn't feel seen, heard, and understood. So it's not always about anxiety like a Woody Allen anxiety. In
Okay.
this case, Allison doesn't she doesn't feel seen, heard, and understood either. And if you notice in the film, I think she makes up stories like she's a, what were some of the things, Adrian, that she makes up in the film? She
Uh,
steals,
yeah.
she calls herself a nymphomaniac, and then
Yeah.
she says she's lying. And actually, she's not even in detention. She showed up there because she had nothing else better to do.
So what's this? So what you're saying is that there can be a kind of passive response to a lack of attention, and also because when we look at the difference between the two of them, she felt invisible, and she was invisible for reasons that she didn't know, and he felt too visible and too entrenched with his father. So what you're saying to me is that it seems to always acting out as teenagers seems to some way tie into the relationship with their parents. Are you saying it's our fault? It's always our fault?
Right, yeah. A lot of people hear this as a parent blaming. I think it's important to understand that in the Breakfast Club, we only have two generations.
Okay.
And when I did my blog series, I didn't want to intuit information that wasn't in the film. I wanted to use the facts. Hughes never goes to the grandparents. But in my work with the families, when they come into my office, every single family, when there's an adolescent-focused problem, we do a family diagram that goes back at least three generations. So the kids, the teenagers, the parents, and the grandparents.
And
And the
the purpose of that
grandparents.
is, what's the purpose of that?
The purpose of this is to expand the problem away from the child. And then you expand the problem away from the parents. And then you expand it to the family. And what's beautiful, Adrian, not, by the way, let me be clear, not everybody can do this. There are some families I work with where there's a real doubling down of focus on one person. So
Right.
in one case, it might be one spouse thinking it's my husband who messed up my kids. In another situation, it's my kid is broken in some fundamental ways. But for the families that can hear this, they can see the gestalt of the whole thing, that this is a family problem. It's not in any one person. And if that is true, that it's a family problem, then here's what's so beautiful. Then the solution is in the family. The solution is in the family. And here's the other thing that's important, and I think that the parents who work with me in the long term come to this realization. The solution can't come from the kid.
What? Wait, hold on a minute. If it's a family problem, you're saying that if an adolescent comes into therapy presenting as a problem child, either by their own choice or the parents push them there, how can you treat the child then if you're not treating the whole family?
You know, I'll tell you something, Adrian. It's a great question. I spent about 10 years working with teenagers only without parents. I'm not going to get into a long story why I switched, but I switched in Vancouver for a number of reasons. And I started working with the parents, and I did not bring in the kids ever. Okay,
Wow.
it's a long story. It's not important,
Okay.
but it was a suggestion by my late supervisor. Don't work with the kids. I thought that was crazy, but the
Mhm.
kids failing out of school, the kids selling drugs in school. You have to bring in the kid. He said, don't bring in the kids. And he said, why? So I started working with the parents, and I discovered something that the great researchers and thinkers in the world of family therapy have known for a long time. And this is it. Change in a system is anything where there's more than one person. So a church, a synagogue, a marriage, a family, a company. Change always has to start from the leadership, and then it filters through the system. It never starts from the janitor in a synagogue and then bubbles up to the president or the rabbi. Change always has to, and the question is, of course, is, well, why? Why can't a precocious 16-year-old girl make necessary changes? It's not that they can't, but for the most part, 16, 17, 18-year-olds don't have the financial and emotional maturity to make the kind of decisions and regulate anxiety when the family or system pushes back on the change. Because here's a guarantee. Anybody that tries to make a change in a family, in a marriage or in a family, there will be a natural inclination for other people in the family to push back for things the way they were,
Right.
even if they're worse, even if they were worse.
The devil you know.
Exactly. That's
It's like,
exactly the devil you
it's
know.
almost
Yeah.
like we return to the familiar because we're more comfortable with it. I mean, you know, there is a dynamic actually in the Bible, the whole idea of the Israelites leaving Egypt and wanting to go back to Egypt because it was familiar. You know, so this is a lifelong model of behavior. But correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like if you've got a problem with one of your kids, it's you that needs to go with your spouse or your ex-spouse or even just one parent to examine the family before you send the kid in?
Well, let me tell you this, Adrian. You show me a teenager who wants to go to therapy, I'll give you $100.
Wow. Really?
You should now. Adrian. It's interesting. Whenever a family comes to see me and they say, my kid really wants to come too, you know what I'm thinking? I'm not thinking, what a bright, smart kid. I'm thinking, this is going to be a lot of work.
Oh, it's so interesting you should say that. Just as somebody typed in as a question, how do you get your child to therapy if they forcefully resist? I guess you
One of
don't.
one of the things that I think parents tell, by the time parents come to see me, they've already been to Sick Kids Hospital, they've been to all their CBT therapists, they've tried mindfulness, they've hucked this kid to every single special, and by the time they get to me, they're looking for anything that's different, and they're so relieved to hear, I don't want to see your kid. I don't want
Wow.
to see your kid. And by the way, we could include your child, but what I tell parents is, I want to work with you for 4 or 5 sessions. Let's get a good historical background, some good context here. And by 5 sessions in, they understand why it's best not even to bring in the kid.
Okay, let me ask you something. How often do you see intergenerational patterns repeating themselves that the parents themselves are not even conscious of, that the kid is acting out on?
Well, I mean, first of all, there are some parents who are just they have the taste, they have the interest, so they come into my office with a certain level of vocabulary and knowledge about this. So these are, by the way, I have to say, just it's lovely working with those families. They hear me talk, and they come in to see me after one of my talks, and they go, you know what? And I know that I failed math, so I get very anxious about math. My father never finished high school, so he was worried about me. His grandpa, so they come in with an understanding of there's chronic anxiety in my family that goes back 5 generations around school. I am so worried about my kid because they're struggling, and I know that I am making things worse, even though I'm getting them tutors and I'm focused. So some families actually come in like that, which is lovely, but that's rare. So the key here is, when a family comes into my office, it's very important to not remove the discussion about the child. You have to talk about the child, of course. But a little bit of the magic is slowly moving the focus to the source of the problem. Now, where is the source of the problem?
Yeah.
I would say, and don't shoot the messenger, but I would say 7 times out of 10, there's an unresolved marital issue, and
What?
one, I can only tell you what I see in my office.
Wait, Avram, wait, hold on. Are you talking about divorced families or even families where people are together still?
It's so interesting, Adrian. There's a concept that we have that you could be married and emotionally divorced, and you could be divorced and still emotionally married.
Okay, say that again and tease that out.
You could be in a marriage, so
Right?
you have your ketubah,
Yeah.
right? You have a house together,
Yes.
right? You sleep in the same bed, but you
Yes.
are emotionally and physically divorced. So you're married, but there ain't nothing going on there. And then what happens is one or two of them start to focus on something else. So a typical example would be one partner focuses on work and the other focuses on the child. And what's interesting is this can go on a long time. Why? Because who's going to argue with hard work? No one. Hard work is quite virtuous. And who's going to argue with a parent who focuses on their teenager? No one, because that's good parenting. The problem kicks in is when that anxious focus from one parent goes to a teenager chronically, a symptom develops, and that's how people end up in my office when a
Okay, I'm
teenager is here.
sorry. I'm thick. Help me understand in that dynamic of a mother who says, my job is my child. That's my primary obligation. And I'm worried about that kid. And I'm here for her, him 24/7. Whereas you are out to work all the time. And he says, I am making a living for this family. I can pay for those therapist bills and those tutors and all those things that you want. What has that got to do with the kid?
Yeah, welcome to my life. Welcome to my office. Yeah, no, and by the way, it's understandable. You know why? You take a parent, right, who works really hard, and they see their role, a loving role, as making a good income for their family. All I have to ask them is, tell me about your parents. And they say the same. We learn through osmosis in terms of what love is. My late supervisor used to say something very profound, and it's taken me many years to appreciate this. Okay, it's a humble idea, but I think it's true. We only can love more or less to the degree that we were loved. Not much more, not much less. Now, we can do something about that over time. Adrian, as you know, you wouldn't be doing this work if you didn't believe that. It's a little bit of change that can impact generations one way or the other, up or down. But it just takes a little bit of change. But this idea that we can completely reinvent our characters and reinvent our past, I'm sorry, with all due respect, 30 years of doing this work, I think that is highly unrealistic.
Okay, stop for a minute. Stop.
Yeah.
We know, I mean, really, it was Rabbi Salanter who said the loudest sound in the universe is the sound of a person changing even one character trait. So we know there's something in the Jewish tradition that talks about the difficulty in that. However, from a Jewish perspective, it is priority one is to work on your negative traits. So you're not talking necessarily about working on your negative traits. You're talking about finding a way to work with your history, your past, your own particular cracks, if you will, and sublimating them, redirecting them. What would you have us do if we're that tied into our past? If we can't reinvent the history, then how do we change our futures?
Yeah, Adrian, it's interesting. It doesn't. I really don't believe actually that people, especially in parenting teenage situations, that people have to be in deep psychoanalysis 5 times a week to get to the roots of their history. All I have to ask a parent is, what are you worried about? That's it. What are you worried about? And so a parent says to me, what am I worried about? I'm worried about my kid won't get into university. And blah, blah, blah. And as they're speaking, you know what I'm hearing?
What?
I'm hearing the parent talk about themselves.
Ah,
I'm hearing the parent talk about themselves. And if I do my job properly, and I don't always do, but if I do it properly, I have the parent quiet themselves down and think about how their anxiety is being thrown onto their kid. And like in the Breakfast Club, the child moves away from, in Allison's case, or moves towards, in Andrew's case, the jock's case, right? And the child loses the capability to develop their unique gift of why they are here in the world. What's the Breakfast Club about? It ends by the geek. What's his name? Michael
yeah.
Anthony Hall. Or what's
Right,
it?
right.
Brian. It ends by Brian saying something so beautiful. You see us as a jock, nerd, whatever. It's such a beautiful idea. What Hughes was trying to say is, we are born into this world with a unique gift. We don't know what it is, right? We have no idea what it is. And whether you're religious or you believe in Darwin, either you believe that we are here for some sort of unique purpose or you don't. I happen to believe that we are all here to discover that unique purpose, to chip away at the stone and to develop that uniqueness. Parents have an opportunity to serve as wise elders to their kids. And I'm going to say something that's going to sound counterintuitive, to get out of the teenager's way, get out of their way and reconnect in a different way. Because what happens is a lot of parents hear this message and they think, are you saying I should ignore my kid?
Right.
Are you saying just leave them alone? No, it's to be more of a consultant with your kid. So how do you do that? Would you like me to share just a couple of ideas of how
I would love that. I'm just, it's never too late, by the way. I just want you to know that, You can, and I want our listeners to know that you can make a ton of mistakes over functioning and putting your anxiety all over your kid. And it's never too late, as long as we're all drawing breath, to correct that. Would you say that's fair?
Look, Adrian, you know me. We've spoken before. You've heard my story with my father. My parents divorced when I was 30. I had a cutoff with my father. He
Okay,
buried his.
wait. Explain what a cutoff is.
So my father and I just didn't speak very much. It wasn't a fight. We just had nothing to say to each other. By the way, most of the men in my office have similar relationships with their father. They'll talk about sports, but they would never talk about anything of substance with their father. With Father's Day coming up, something to keep in mind for fathers who have kids.
Sure.
But so my father and I, we didn't have much of a relationship, and I would be always looking for other father figures in my life, and it never worked out. My father buried his father with a total cutoff. And at the age of 30, when my parents divorced, my father wrote me a letter. My father wrote me a letter. And he said in his letter, and I have it in Evernote, I've saved the letter, I am going to make a promise to you right now. I am going to do better by you as a father. And when I got the letter, I thought, whatever. You've made many promises. My father and I slowly, by paradigm shift, because my parents were divorced, I had to see the guy, right? He stuck by his word. He was probably, I'm going to say he was in his late 50s. We rekindled our relationship, and I had some systems theory at the time because of graduate school, so I knew it was important to reconnect with my father, or I was going to repeat that pattern with my kids. Now, I was single at the time. My father and I rekindled our relationship. We would go out for suppers. We would go for walks. Our relationship, I really can say, was beautiful right until his death. My father was able to hold my eldest son, and he died 3 weeks after my eldest son. Sorry, 6 weeks after my eldest son was born. I am living proof that what you just said, Adrian, is so important for people to understand. It is never too late to rework the multi-generational patterns that we've inherited. Never too late. So,
Okay, Avrum, if you could speak directly to the likely thousands of people who will be listening to this, people who are worried about their teens, people, for example, one person in the chat said, my daughter, 16 years old, accepted to go to therapy and feels good in her space. Is that bad? Somebody else said, my 20-year-old daughter loves to go to therapy. Is she a future therapist? Can you give us some examples of ways to reconnect and consult? I mean, there's probably another conversation for us to be had in this. What would you say right now to a mother, to a father, to parents, regardless of what the dynamic is, that are worried sick about a teenager? I'm not talking about the things that are dangerous to their lives. I'm talking about, drug addiction and that sort of thing. I'm talking about a parent who's fundamentally worried and anxious about how their kid's going to turn out. If you could say 3 things to those parents, what would you say?
well, could we just address the first one? You mentioned that
Okay.
there are parents who have kids who love going to therapy.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. First of all, 20 is not 16. So I think it's important to point out 20 is a young adult. So a 20-year-old who says, I'm really stuck. I don't know what course to take at university. I find it's hard to speak to my parents and I want to speak to someone. I still would push back on that. If a 20-year-old called me and I would say, how come you can't speak to your mom? Why can't you speak to your dad? Do you have any uncles or aunts or grandpa? Where are the wise elders in your family? Why do you need to pay for therapy? And I have to say, when I ask those questions and they say to me, there's no one in my family, that's a problem. So sure, they can come to therapy, but I'm not so sure that it's the love of therapy. That's a fantastic thing. The problem here is, why doesn't this 20-year-old have a wise elder in the family they can turn to talk about these things? Sex, relationships, my career, God. If a 20-year-old needs to go to see a therapist for 4 years and they have no one in their family that they can turn to, the problem is a family problem. So I just want to say that I think it's fine for a 20-year-old to love therapy. It usually means that they have a certain, sophistication about them. But I'd be very careful if I was a parent to financially support that. I would really think hard about your role as being a wise elder to your child. Adrian, the role of a parent never ends. And I'm telling you, Adrian, something right now. And if people don't see this, what's happening with our world, then I don't know what they're not saying. We need wise elders more than ever before. And I don't mean presidents, and I don't mean prime ministers. I'm not even suggesting rabbis. We need wise elders in our family to stand up and to share stories about suffering and hope. You know, in my office, when people were coming in their 60s, I would ask them, what have you learned, not about coronavirus, but other challenges you've went through? And it was so hopeful to hear people share their own stories of losing a business or being through the Great Depression. And it's those stories that reduce anxiety. And by the way, there's good family research to suggest families who share stories in terms of tradition, anxiety goes down, mental health issues go down. So I really implore people to think twice, or not think twice, to think carefully about outsourcing their role to therapists. And by the way, I make a good living, Adrian, doing this. So let me be clear. I'm not saying don't call me. What I am saying is be very careful to outsource your role as a wise elder to your children to therapists.
Avrum, I could talk to you for another 2 days. I have so many questions for you, and the chat has blown up, and unfortunately, we have to stop now. I want you to know that that these are such huge ideas and so different for so many people. So what we're going to do is figure out a way to unpack this for them. I will speak to you again. We'll work more on deepening this understanding. But for now, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us. Thank you, Avrum.
It was a pleasure, and Shabbat Shalom.
To you too.